What if the world you perceive, the solid earth beneath your feet, the silent stars in their courses, the very thoughts flickering through your awareness, is not what it seems? What if reality itself is a projection, an emanation from a single boundless consciousness? There is an ancient and radical proposition, a whisper carried on the winds of time that declares, the all is mind, the universe is mental. This is not merely a philosophical curiosity, it is a master key, one that promises to unlock the deepest secrets of existence. For millennia, this idea has flowed like a secret river beneath the great deserts of history, guarded by sages and mystics, encoded in symbols and sealed in cryptic texts. Who were these guardians of a lost science of the soul? What did they understand about the power of consciousness to not only perceive the world, but to create it? Our investigation begins here, at the threshold of a forgotten wisdom, in pursuit of a truth so profound, it threatens to dissolve the very boundary between the knower and the known. This is a journey into the heart of a living hypothesis, one that lies far beyond the pale of materialistic science and conventional faith, a quest to understand the ultimate nature of reality itself. Our search for the source of this tremendous idea takes us back through the centuries, to a time and place where civilizations collided and gods were reborn, the sprawling, syncretic landscape of Hellenistic Egypt. Here, in the cultural crucible forged by Alexander's conquests, the intellectual currents of Greece, Egypt, and the Near East mingled, creating a fertile ground for new philosophies to bloom. In this world of dissolving certainties and expanding horizons, a singular figure emerged from the fusion of two mighty deities. From Greece came Hermes, the swift-footed messenger of the gods, the master of language, interpretation, and boundaries. From the ancient black land of Kem came Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the Egyptian pantheon, the reckoner of time, the inventor of writing, and the keeper of all sacred knowledge. In the minds of the people of this new era, these two gods were recognized as one and the same, their functions profoundly intertwined. Thus was born Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice greatest, a name that echoed an ancient Egyptian epithet for Thoth, the great, the great, the great, grounding this new Hellenistic culture hero in the immemorial wisdom of the pharaohs. There is no historical record of Hermes Trismegistus as a single living man. He was, rather, a legendary fountainhead, a mythic author to whom a vast and diverse body of writings, the Hermetica, was attributed. This attribution was a masterstroke of spiritual authority. By stamping his name upon these texts, their authors cloaked them in the majesty of primordial time, presenting them not as new philosophies, but as revelations from a sage who walked the earth with Moses, a prophet who predated Plato and the entire Greek philosophical tradition. This claim was central to the Hermetic worldview, which professed a lineage from a Prisca Theologia, a primordial theology. This was the conviction that a single universal truth, a one truth, was gifted to the earliest humans, and that this wisdom was the common source of all the world's religions and philosophies. The Hermetic teachings were seen as the purest expression of this original revelation. This body of literature, composed largely between the 2nd century BCE and the 3rd century CE, flowed in two distinct but related streams. The first was the technical Hermetica, a collection of practical treatises on astrology, alchemy, and theurgy, the art of divine magic. These were the arts of engaging with the cosmos, of understanding the sympathies that bind the stars to the stones, and of manipulating the hidden forces of nature. The second, and for our investigation the more profound, was the philosophical Hermetica. These texts, written as dialogues between the master Hermes and his disciples, Tat and Asclepius, were not concerned with manipulating the world, but with transcending it. They offered a path to salvation, a way for the soul to achieve gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of God, and return to its divine source. The emergence of this complex tradition was no historical accident. It was a deeply human response to an age of profound cultural dislocation. The conquests of Alexander had shattered old worlds and created a new globalized society under Roman rule. In this cosmopolitan melting pot, old tribal identities and religious certainties were dissolving. The Hermetic project can be understood as a grand attempt to forge a new spiritual identity for the people of this new world. It was a path that honored the deep, enigmatic wisdom of ancient Egypt, while speaking the sophisticated language of Hellenistic philosophy, weaving together Egyptian motifs with the concepts of Platonism and Stoicism. In an age of impersonal empires and distant gods, Hermeticism offered an intimate and personal path to the divine, a way for the individual soul to find its place in a vast and newly unified cosmos. For 1,000 years, the philosophical Hermetica largely vanished from the Latin West, preserved only in the libraries of Byzantium and the scholarship of the Islamic world, where Hermes was revered as the prophet Idris. But in the 15th century, the secret stream of Hermetic thought erupted once more into European consciousness, and its arrival would ignite an intellectual revolution. The story of this second birth pivots on a single dramatic moment in Florence, the heart of the burgeoning Renaissance. In the year 1460, an agent working for the city's great patron, Cosimo de' Medici, returned from Macedonia with a Greek manuscript containing 14 of the treatises we now know as the Corpus Hermeticum. At the time, Cosimo's chief scholar, the brilliant Marsilio Ficino, was undertaking the monumental task of translating the complete dialogues of Plato into Latin for the first time. But upon receiving the Hermetic texts, Cosimo issued a startling command. Ficino was to cease his work on Plato and translate Hermes Trismegistus immediately. The reasoning was simple and, for the Renaissance mind, utterly compelling. Hermes was believed to be an Egyptian sage of immense antiquity, a contemporary of Moses who had taught the Greeks their philosophy. Therefore, his wisdom was far older, purer, and more authoritative than even Plato's. With this single decision, the lost wisdom of Hermes was placed at the very center of the Renaissance project. Ficino's Latin translation, completed in 1463, sent shockwaves through the intellectual world of Europe. It presented a vision of humanity that was electrifying. Here were texts that described the human being not as a fallen creature, but as a magnum miraculum, a great miracle, an entity of divine potential, a being to be adored and honored. This philosophy, which fused religion, magic, and philosophy into a coherent whole, provided the spiritual fuel for the archetypal figure of the Renaissance, the Magus. Thinkers like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola were inspired to attempt grand syntheses, weaving Hermeticism together with Jewish Kabbalah and Christian mysticism in a quest to uncover the universal grammar of creation. This new vision of human potential spilled over into the arts. The Hermetic adept, it was taught, could do more than just imitate nature. Through the sacred arts of alchemy and magic, they could perfect and even rival it. This worldview is believed to be encoded in the enigmatic masterpieces of the age. In the otherworldly grace of Botticelli's Primavera, some scholars see not just a mythological scene, but a complex Hermetic allegory, a talismanic image designed to draw down planetary virtues and depict a process of spiritual rebirth. In the dense, brooding symbolism of Albrecht Dürer's engraving, Melancholia I, others perceive a profound meditation on the alchemical process and the melancholic genius of the artist Magus, struggling to transmute the lead of matter into the gold of divine insight. The apotheosis of this Hermetic revival and its most tragic figure was the Dominican friar Giordano Bruno. For Bruno, Hermeticism was not just a philosophy. It was a true, ancient Egyptian religion that promised to reform a corrupt world. As the historian Francis Yates argued, Bruno's radical cosmology, his vision of an infinite, animate universe, a limitless expanse filled with countless suns and worlds, each inhabited by living beings, was a direct consequence of his Hermetic beliefs. This was a universe that was itself a god, a living expression of an infinite divine power. Such a vision was a profound threat to the finite, earth-centered cosmos of the Church. When Bruno was arrested by the Inquisition, he was tried not merely for his belief in a sun-centered system, but for the theological and magical foundations of his entire worldview. His refusal to recant his beliefs, his unwavering commitment to the Hermetic vision, led him to be burned at the stake in Rome's Campo de' Fiori in the year 1600, a martyr for a lost religion of the cosmos. Yet, the entire edifice of Renaissance Hermeticism was built upon a magnificent historical error. The Magi of Florence and beyond were galvanized by the belief that these texts were the primordial wisdom of ancient Egypt. In 1614, the classical scholar Isaac Casaubon performed a linguistic analysis of the Corpus Hermeticum and proved conclusively that the texts were not from the time of Moses. Their Greek was not of an ancient dialect, but was clearly from the early centuries of the Christian era. This revelation did not destroy Hermeticism, but it shattered the foundation of its authority. The thrice greatest Hermes was not the ancient fount of wisdom, but a contemporary of the Gnostics and the early Church Fathers. This creates a stunning historical paradox. One of the most fertile and revolutionary periods in Western thought was catalyzed by a case of mistaken identity. It reveals that the power of an idea lies not always in its verifiable origin, but in its ability to ignite the human imagination. The question it forces us to ask is a deeply Hermetic one. Does the truth of a revelation depend on where it came from, or on where it takes you? Having traced the river of Hermetic thought through history, we now arrive at its philosophical core. We must dive into the waters themselves and grasp the essential teachings that have captivated mystics, artists, and philosophers for centuries. Our first key is a text of immense power and legendary mystique, a single cryptic page that purports to contain the whole of the art, the Emerald Tablet. Though its precise origins are shrouded in legend, its earliest known form appears in Arabic works from the 8th and 9th centuries, often within a frame story of its discovery in a hidden tomb, clutched in the hands of the deceased Hermes himself. For centuries, it was read as a coded recipe for practical alchemy, a guide to creating the philosopher's stone. But its dense, poetic verses point to a far deeper mystery, the transmutation of the human soul. Its most famous axiom, the second verse, contains the master key to the entire Hermetic worldview. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracle of one only thing. This is the principle of correspondence. It declares that the universe is not a collection of separate things, but a single, living, interconnected whole, bound by sympathies and analogies. The human being, the microcosm, is a perfect reflection of the greater universe, the macrocosm. The laws that govern the stars also govern the soul. Therefore, to truly know oneself is to know the cosmos, and to know the cosmos is to know God. This principle finds its most profound elaboration in the first and most important treatise of the Corpus Hermeticum, the Poimandres, or Shepherd of Men. The text opens with the narrator, Hermes, in a state of deep meditation, his bodily senses withdrawn. In this state, he receives a vision. A being of boundless light appears, identifying himself as Poimandres, the divine mind. What follows is a revelation of the nature of reality. Poimandres reveals that the cosmos was born not from a physical act, but from the thought of God. The universe is a mental creation. From the divine mind emanated the word, the logos. And from this union of mind and word, the material world took shape as an ordered, beautiful reflection of a higher, ideal cosmos. The all is mind, the universe is mental. Within this mental creation, the divine mind then brings forth Anthropos, the archetypal human, made in God's own image, possessing the creative power of the Father. The Hermetic story of the fall is unique and poignant. It is not a story of punishment or sin, but of love. Anthropos descends through the 7 planetary spheres, and seeing his own divine reflection in the elements of lower nature, he falls in love with it. Nature, in turn, seeing the beautiful form of God in man, embraces him. They unite in love, and from this cosmic embrace, humanity is born with a dual nature. Our bodies are mortal, subject to the cycles of fate governed by the planets. But our inner essence, the essential human, is immortal, a spark of the divine light and life of God. This is a crucial distinction from the worldview of the Gnostics, who often saw the material world as an evil prison created by a lesser, malevolent deity. For the Hermeticist, the cosmos is a beautiful creation, and our entanglement with it is born of love, not error. The path of salvation, therefore, is a path of remembrance. It is achieved through gnosis, a direct, intuitive, and experiential knowing of our true divine nature. The Hermetic path is a journey inward. By turning away from the distractions of the mortal body and its passions, the seeker learns to know themselves as a being of mind. This self-knowledge is the beginning of an ascent back to the source. In a reverse of the descent, the soul rises through the 7 planetary spheres, shedding at each level the mortal passions and limitations associated with that planet: arrogance, greed, desire, falsehood. Stripped of these earthly shells, the soul is reborn into its true nature, rejoining the divine mind and becoming one again with the all. This cosmology can be read not just as a myth, but as a sophisticated map of human consciousness. The descent into matter is the ego's identification with the physical body and the sensory world. The ascent through the spheres is a process of profound psychological purification. As modern scholars like Wouter Hanegraaff have argued, these texts were not mere philosophical treatises, but manuals for experiential practices designed to induce radical alterations of consciousness and heal the soul from the hallucinatory veil of appearances. The Hermetic path is a technology of the soul, a method for awakening the mind to its own infinite nature. How, then, did the ancient Hermeticist translate these sublime philosophies into lived experience? How was the chasm between the mortal human and the divine mind to be bridged? The answer lay not in passive belief, but in an active, sacred science, a set of spiritual technologies designed to purify the soul and elevate consciousness. This was the praxis of the Way of Hermes, a threefold art of transformation involving theurgy, alchemy, and astrology. These were not separate disciplines, but integrated facets of a single method for achieving gnosis. Theurgy, or god work, was perhaps the most direct of these arts. This was not the crude sorcery of coercing spirits, but a subtle and demanding discipline of ritual communion. The Hermetic theurgist sought to invoke and commune with divine powers, not to bend them to a personal will, but to align their own soul with the harmonies of the cosmos. Through purification, incantation, and the use of sacred symbols, the practitioner aimed to make their own being a worthy vessel, a polished mirror capable of reflecting the divine light. This was a direct engagement with the principle of correspondence, a conscious effort to tune the microcosm of the self to the macrocosmic symphony. Deeper still was the art of alchemy. To the uninitiated eye, it was the quest to transmute base metals into gold, but to the Hermetic adept, this was merely the outward symbol of a far greater work, the transmutation of the soul itself. The alchemical laboratory was a microcosm, the crucible a womb for spiritual rebirth. The stages of the great work, the nigredo, or blackening, representing the dissolution of the ego and confrontation with the shadow, the albedo, or whitening, a purification of the soul, and the rubedo, or reddening, the final glorious reunion with the divine spirit, were a map of psychological and spiritual transformation. This was not chemistry but psychodrama. The philosopher's stone was not a substance, but an enlightened state of being, the integrated self that has unified its opposing natures. Hermetic astrology, too, was more than mere divination. It was the grammar of cosmic sympathy. The 7 planets were not just celestial bodies, but the archons, the great governors of the material world, their influences weaving the fabric of fate. Unlike the Gnostics, who often viewed these planetary rulers as malevolent jailers of a corrupt cosmos, the Hermeticists saw them as divine administrators of a beautiful, albeit lower creation. To understand the celestial chart was to understand the forces shaping one's mortal life. This knowledge was power, not the power to escape fate, but the wisdom to navigate it, to understand its lessons, and ultimately, on the path of gnosis, to transcend its bonds entirely as the soul ascended back to its source. The culmination of these practices was the direct experiential knowledge of God. This was not a belief, but an event. Texts like the Discourse on the 8th and 9th, discovered among the Nag Hammadi scrolls, give us a tantalizing glimpse into the ritual reality of this experience. It was an initiation, a guided ascent of consciousness. Through prayer, hymns, and a state of profound inner silence, the initiate was led by the master beyond the 7 planetary spheres of fate into the Ogdoad and Ennead, the 8th and 9th realms of pure, divine mind. Here, in a flood of indescribable light, the soul remembered its true nature, shed its mortal attachments, and experienced a spiritual rebirth, becoming one with the all. This was the ultimate goal of the Way of Hermes, to heal the soul, to awaken it from the dream of material existence, and to restore it to its primordial state of divine unity. Our investigation has so far charted the history, philosophy, and sacred arts of the Hermetic tradition. But a map is not the territory. A description of a path is not the feeling of the earth beneath one's feet. We must now ask a more intimate question. What does it mean to live as a Hermeticist? What is the inner texture of this spiritual quest? The answer is not found in a system of dogma, but in the cultivation of a certain quality of being, a turning of attention from the outer world of appearances to the inner temple of the self. The central altar of this temple is the spiritual heart, a concept fundamental to the soul's journey toward the divine. The Way of Hermes is, above all, a path of reverence. It is a joyful spirituality that seeks to heal the soul from the wounds of negativity, fear, and aggression by opening our eyes to the inherent beauty of existence. This is not a passive appreciation, but an active state of piety, a continuous mindful orientation toward the good. This piety is the key that unlocks the inner temple. The Hermetic texts describe a necessary first step, a withdrawal of the bodily senses. This is a conscious act of turning away from the ceaseless clamor of the material world not out of disgust for it, but to create a space of profound inner silence. It is in this stillness, when the eyes are closed to the physical world, that true vision can occur. The sleep of the body becomes the sobriety of the soul. It is from this sacred silence that revelation is born. The seeker, having quieted the storm of sensory input, can begin to perceive the subtle realities that lie behind the hallucinatory veil of appearances. This is the state from which Hermes himself received the vision of Poimandres. It is a radical alteration of consciousness, an intentional journey into the depths of one's own being to find the divine spark that resides there. This is not a flight from the world, but a deep dive beneath its surface to discover its source. The goal is to see mind with mind, to perceive the true nature of reality directly, without the distorting filter of the unpurified ego. The culmination of this inner work is a spiritual rebirth, an ecstatic experience of union that is powerfully described in the Hermetic prayers and hymns. In the discourse on the 8th and 9th, we witness the initiate, guided by the Master, calling out to the divine, "Lord, grant us the truth in the image. Allow us through the Spirit to see the form of the image that has no deficiency." What follows is an explosion of awareness. I see indescribable depths. I am mind, and I see another mind, the one that moves the soul. I see the one that moves me from pure forgetfulness. You give me power. I see myself. This is the cry of gnosis. It is the soul remembering its own divine origin, receiving the deathless water of wisdom, and being filled with a power and a love that flows from the source of all things. The seeker becomes an instrument of the divine spirit, a channel for the light that was there all along, hidden within the temple of the heart. This is the core of Hermetic spirituality, a lived, felt, and utterly transformative journey of awakening to the divinity within, and thereby recognizing the divinity in all. In the early 20th century, the name of Hermes Trismegistus once again echoed through the esoteric subcultures of the world, largely thanks to a small mysterious book published in 1908, the Kybalion, a study of the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece. Attributed to the cryptic Three Initiates, this book has, for many modern seekers, become the primary definition of Hermeticism. It presents a clear, concise, and powerful system based on 7 fundamental principles. For over a century, it has served as a gateway, introducing countless readers to the Hermetic worldview. Our investigation, however, must press deeper and ask a crucial question: is the Kybalion truly Hermetic? The identity of the 3 initiates is no longer a complete mystery. A strong scholarly consensus now points to one man, William Walker Atkinson, a prolific and pioneering American author of the New Thought movement. Atkinson was a key figure in a spiritual philosophy that flourished in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. New Thought emphasized the power of the mind to overcome sickness and adversity, promoting concepts like positive thinking and the law of attraction, the idea that our thoughts can directly manifest our reality. These are the very ideas that form the practical core of the Kybalion, yet they are concepts largely foreign to the original Hermetic texts. A close analysis of the 7 principles reveals both a debt to and a significant departure from the ancient tradition. The first principle, mentalism, the all is mind, the universe is mental, clearly echoes the concept of the divine mind, or nous, from the Poimandres. Yet the Kybalion reframes this cosmic principle as a tool for mental transmutation, a method for personal manifestation. The focus shifts from the devotional piety of the ancient texts to the practical power of the individual will. The second principle, correspondence, is a direct inheritance from the emerald tablets, as above, so below. But the remaining 5 principles, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender, while presented as ancient Hermetic laws, are in fact modern formulations. They are a brilliant synthesis of ideas drawn from 19th century science, Eastern philosophies, and especially the tenets of the New Thought movement. As a system of 7, they are not found in the classical Hermetica. The divergence is fundamental. The classical Hermetic texts are profoundly theological, focused on a path of salvation that leads to a reverent reunion with God. The Kybalion, by contrast, is largely practical and psychological, presenting an almost anti-theological system for mastering one's own mental states to achieve desired outcomes in the world. It is a philosophy of self-mastery, where the ancient path of gnosis is recoded as a form of self-help. To simply label the Kybalion a fraud, however, would be to miss its true significance. While it is not an authentic transmission of ancient Hermeticism, it is perhaps the most successful translation of esoteric ideas for the modern age. Atkinson, a master popularizer, took the profound and often difficult concepts of the Hermetic tradition and distilled them into an accessible, actionable, and appealing system perfectly suited to the pragmatic, individualistic spirit of the 20th century. For generations of seekers, the Kybalion has been the first key that they turned, the first door they opened on the path of Western esotericism. Our investigation does not end with dismissing it, but with recognizing it for what it is, not the ancient library itself, but the popular guidebook that leads many to its door. The task for the true seeker is to step through that door and begin to read the original scrolls. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Hermetic current surged once more, finding its most potent and organized expression in the secretive halls of a magical order founded in London in 1888, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. This was not merely a revival, it was a grand synthesis, an audacious attempt to gather the scattered fragments of the Western esoteric traditions and forge them into a single, coherent and practical system for the evolution of the soul. The Golden Dawn sought to create nothing less than the modern Magus. Its founders, William Wynne Westcott, Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, and William Robert Woodman, were all Freemasons and members of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, and they built their new order on a Masonic framework of hierarchy and initiation. But they infused this structure with a curriculum drawn from the deepest wells of esoteric lore: Hermetic philosophy, Jewish Kabbalah, Rosicrucian allegory, tarot divination, astrology, and the complex angelic magic of the Elizabethan mage John Dee. The order was structured as a ladder of ascent, a practical journey up the Kabbalistic tree of life. Initiates began in the outer order, progressing through a series of grades aligned with the 4 classical elements, learning the philosophical foundations of the art. Those who proved worthy could advance to the inner order, the Rosae Rubeae et Aureae Crucis, where the theoretical knowledge was put into practice through the high arts of theurgy, or divine magic. The rituals of the Golden Dawn were its living heart. Ceremonies, like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, were not acts of religious worship, but precise psycho-spiritual technologies. They were designed to purify the magician's sphere of sensation, to balance the elemental forces within the psyche, and to invoke divine powers, all with the ultimate aim of elevating consciousness. The central goal was to achieve knowledge and conversation with one's holy guardian angel, a term for the higher self, the divine spark within. This was the modern operationalization of the Hermetic path of gnosis. Just as their Renaissance predecessors had, the founders of the Golden Dawn understood the power of a myth of origin. The order's authority was based on the claim of discovering a set of cipher manuscripts written in code, which in turn led them to a charter from a mysterious German adept named Anna Sprengel. Like the supposed antiquity of the Corpus Hermeticum itself, this story was almost certainly a pious fraud, a fiction created to bestow an ancient and unimpeachable lineage upon their new creation. The order's true legacy, however, needs no fictional authority. In its methods and curriculum, the Golden Dawn functioned as the first modern university of magic. It took what had been a diffuse and often contradictory collection of traditions and systematized it into a graded course of study, complete with examinations and requirements for advancement. It attracted a remarkable membership of artists, poets, scholars, and physicians, including figures like the poet W.B. Yeats, the author Arthur Machen, and the infamous Aleister Crowley, who would take the order's teachings and use them to found his own religion of Thelema. The Golden Dawn was the crucible in which the ancient philosophy of Hermes was reforged into the practical occultism of the 20th century. Though the original order fractured within a few decades, its teachings became the foundational DNA for nearly every major branch of modern Western esotericism that followed. The return of the Magus was complete. Our investigation has followed a single, luminous thread across 2 millennia. From the syncretic temples of Hellenistic Egypt through the Platonic academies of Renaissance Florence to the secret magical orders of Victorian London, we have pursued a radical idea: that consciousness is not an accident of matter, but that matter is a phenomenon within consciousness. We have seen this idea encoded in philosophy, art, and ritual. But in the 20th century, this ancient Hermetic axiom would find its most startling echoes not in occult libraries, but in the vanguard of modern science and psychology. The great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, in his quest to map the depths of the human psyche, found himself drawn to the cryptic texts of the alchemists. In their obscure symbols of transmutation, the blackening of the nigredo, the whitening of the albedo, the final reddening of the rubedo, he did not see a crude, failed chemistry. He saw a precise symbolic language for the process of psychological transformation he called individuation, the journey toward an integrated whole self. The alchemical conjunctio, the sacred marriage of the solar king and lunar queen, was for Jung a metaphor for the union of the conscious and unconscious, the reconciliation of opposites within the soul. Jung had, in effect, rediscovered the Hermetic path as a fundamental map of the human psyche. This insight led Jung into a remarkable collaboration with one of the pioneers of quantum physics, the Nobel laureate Wolfgang Pauli. Together they wrestled with the profound connection between mind and matter. Their concept of synchronicity, a causal, meaningful coincidences, was a direct attempt to formulate a principle that could bridge the inner world of the psyche with the outer world of physics. It was a modern, scientific restatement of the Hermetic axiom of correspondence: as above, so below. They were searching for the hidden laws that unite the observer with the observed. This search leads us to the strange and unsettling frontier of quantum mechanics itself. The famous observer effect suggests that the very act of conscious measurement is inextricably linked to the reality being measured, that particles seem to exist in a cloud of potentiality until a conscious observer collapses the wave function into a single, definite state. Is this not a stunning scientific resonance with the first Hermetic principle, the declaration that the universe is fundamentally mental in nature? Perhaps the most profound parallel comes from the work of the physicist David Bohm. Disenchanted with the fragmentation of modern physics, Bohm proposed a revolutionary vision of the cosmos. He theorized an implicate or enfolded order, a deeper, non-local dimension of reality, a seamless whole from which our familiar, explicate world of separate objects in space and time unfolds. Bohm described this fundamental reality as an undivided wholeness in flowing movement. It is a vision of a universe where every part contains the whole, a cosmic hologram that is perhaps the most sophisticated scientific model yet of the Hermetic all. We began with a whispering axiom. We end with a revelation. The ultimate secret of Hermes was not a doctrine passed down in a hidden temple. It was a mirror held up to the mind itself. For 2,000 years, we have read the Hermetica as a description of the cosmos, when all along It may have been a user's manual for consciousness. The journey of the soul through the planetary spheres is the journey of awareness shedding its illusions. The principle of correspondence is the recognition of the mind's own fractal nature, and the first principle is the final truth.
The universe is not like a mind. The universe is mind.
And we, as thoughts within that mind, are not merely observers of the great cosmic drama. We are the very consciousness in which it unfolds.